Going traditional in 5 minutes. You'll find out how. Traditional grains. Going traditional, getting you ready for that. That's 5 minutes to go. Folks, get a seat. We're about to go. We've got a packed afternoon. The debate is going to be as robust as the speakers. You'll see it. Get ready. 5 to go.
All right, folks, we're about ready to go. 2 minutes to go. Grab yourself a seat. But just take a look at this, everybody. Just to do a little bit of advertising campaign. This is Betty. Everyone say hi to Betty. Now, Betty, do you know why you're on stage? No. You're on stage because you look like the climate. Look at this. Guys, she's got green, beautiful shoes with the flowering bouquet. It's so botanical. Do a little turn around for us. Ah, it's too good. So, Betty, are you married? Just joking, just joking. It's the afternoon, I wanted to see if you're awake. Anyways, nice, Betty, give her a hand because I just said she's looking you're looking so environmental. Can you be our environmental model?
Yes, please.
We just don't pay very much. All right, bye-bye. That's Betty. All right, folks, get ready. We're going to have a good time. We're going traditional. Traditional grains. A traditional past. What's the best of yesterday and what's the best of tomorrow? Please, would you welcome my dear friend coming all the way from Bulawayo, from the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Hillary. Let me take the stage.
Hillary's got to get back to Bulawayo, so we'd love to make that happen as safely as possible. Welcome, Hillary. Take us away into what your thoughts are and where we should go.
All right, it's okay. I think you can play the PowerPoint, yes. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. All protocol observed. My name is Hillary from Ministry of Agriculture. As I wait for the PowerPoint to be pitched, IT, well, definitely, thank you very much. Can we have our seats? I will try to make sure I transverse this one in the next 10 minutes so that we allow others one. I'm from the Ministry of Agriculture. I'm with my boss here, and my manager, Mr. Namat, and all protocol observed. Let me go to next. My presentation is about agriculture and how we adapt clash and how are we moving from maize production to traditional grains. If you look at the program, they're actually small grains. It starts from that one. They are not small, they're actually big. We call them traditional grains from Ministry of Agriculture. You can go ahead. Definitely, maize is a problem. Sometimes in certain areas in Zimbabwe, rainfall is no longer reliable, so we need to come up with some actions. Also, droughts are very common. Not to mention, we have several droughts from the past. From the internet, there's a lot of things, noise said about droughts coming, but we are not sure. But farmers need to feed the population within Zimbabwe, but with the right food. Traditional grains, they're the way. Why? Because they are natural adaptive in Africa and Zimbabwe. It's more of like a fish which live in the water. If you remove a fish from the water, it won't survive. So traditional grains, these are crops for Africans, for Zimbabweans. So looking at that from the PowerPoint, most farmers in Zimbabwe, they try to grow those crops, but at the end, if you look at the pictures, they end up having some issues, dry spells, a lot of mental issues in their minds. BPs, look at from that map from the MSD. There were about 40 days without rains in 2023. So why are we going for maize sometimes? I'm not saying it's bad, but let's make sure that we adapt to climate. Let's move on. Well, agro-crop tilling. What are we doing as a Minister of Agriculture? I think we heard about it. We have about 6, if not 5 agricultural regions in Zimbabwe. 1, 2A, 2B, 3, 4, maybe 5A and 5B. Those areas, farmers tend to grow those crops, especially maize. But why are we growing maize everywhere? We should actually go for these traditional grains, mainly sorghum, pale millet, finger millet. So if you look at agro-tailoring map from Zimbabwe, which we use, we have actually seen that for those farmers who go for traditional grains, they are actually food secure more than the one who go for maize. Let's move on. Well, just to look at it, how the Minister of Agriculture understands the importance of traditional grains. I know you are from lunch. Some of you shun traditional grains. I'll show you the reason why are you shunning small grains, traditional grains. Actually, they are more nutritious. If you look at the summer plan for this year, the whole country is moving away from maize to traditional grains. Why? We have noticed that from the Ministry of Agriculture, if we mainstream those crops, we'll be able to have a nutritious and food security country. So if you look at it, we are actually pushing for sorghum, pure millet, and finger millet. Not forgetting other traditional crops, which are more like underutilized crops, African pea, bambara nuts. Those are very nutritious. But now I'm targeting those 3 traditional grains which are suitable in Zimbabwe. Let's move on. PowerPoint. Well, I'm not saying maize wrong. We need to complement those crops, maize and traditional grains. But just to look at it, look at how the write-offs. After planting, after doing all the land preparation costs, if you look at it from region 4, region 5, region 6, we have a number of maybe 25 to 30% write-off after planting. But if we do the traditional grains, you'll be able, if you look at that, you reduce all those issues of write-offs. Let's move on. Definitely, this one is a very powerful analysis from the Ministry of Agriculture. If you look at it, those districts, they are known each and every year that if you try to grow maize, you end up with some issues. From those red line, you can actually see those dates. I'm not saying they should shun away from maize, but why are they not going the strategy which is actually promoted by the ministry to do in agro-tailoring? Okay. I've noticed that we have kids, students from schools, you don't want to eat traditional crops like pure millet. But if you go back to the previous slide, look at those guys, very healthy young kids eating cereal from the finger millet. Do you know that? We're going to see the reason why go for traditional grains. Let's move on. From the past 10 years after the agro-tailoring strategy from the Ministry of Agriculture, the area and production under traditional grain, they are going up each and every year. Move on. Well, this is another very poor analysis again from the Ministry of Agriculture. From the right side, you can grow maize anywhere, but there's some areas where we actually know that they're not suitable. So, but if you go for traditional grains, the whole country is naturally suitable. So why do you want to go for risk? Let's move on. Well, These are factors affecting traditional grains. We understand there are many of them. There's the issue of research from the University of Zimbabwe here. We have the issue of market. We have the issue of low consumer. Of course, police. There's a police which is already sitting in the Ministry of Agriculture pushing for these traditional grains. We have issue of inadequate extension. They know how to grow these traditional grains. It's an issue. Why? Because we were weaned from the natural understanding of growing these crops. There's the issue of perceived poor. I mean, as you choose your meal, say if you eat traditional grains, you are very poor. It's wrong. Please, it's very, very wrong. For those people who eat traditional grains, especially sorghum, pure millet, you have a good fiber. You are healthy more than the person who go for maize. I'm not degrading maize, understand me there. Also, the seed availability, I think we have seed discambants here. Make sure you promote traditional grains. Let them be available. Go back again a bit. Go for the climate change, is what we are talking about here. There's the issue of post-harvests and climate change. Issue of birds, they actually chow or eat all traditional grains. Let's move on, next. Well, why traditional grains by 2030? We need to learn to unlearn. Do you get it? To learn to unlearn. Let's change our mindset and go for traditional grains. You become more healthier if you go for these ones. Let's change our perception. Let's make sure you start to think positively about traditional grains. All those are the benefits of it. Let's move on. Secure Zimbabwe future with traditional grains. Solution is in our hands. Superior nutrition, more protein, more iron, more fiber. You see? Go. I think you are mixing up. Yeah, it's okay. More iron, economic stability. If we go for this one, we have food and nutrition, we will achieve a food security without any issues. No less use of inputs. If you check the inputs you put in maize and compare it to the maize, very fortunately, production of yield from small grains, especially from sorghum, is now almost tallying with maize in some varieties. Let's go on. Well, this is the summary of it. I think we are going to share the PowerPoint. We need to know the value chain of all traditional grains and make sure we do what is necessary for the country. Let's move on. Well, I think that's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Hillary, that was fantastic. Don't move away. You know, folks, it might be a Thursday afternoon. We're about to go to the next speaker. And because we're in this insatiable world of flick and click and what's next, we may have just missed the most profound statement made from the Politburo to Mount Hamden to back here. Did you just hear what's been said? And I don't say that lightly. I'm not doing that for a sensationalistic effect. You have just turned on its head, sir, the entire construct of nutrition and cereal foods. Are we listening? It's because in your gentle voice, you presented earth-shattering ideas. And how does an idea become an ideal? It becomes real. You've got to add the reality to ideality. So as you close out, remember as a young man going to Battle Creek, Michigan, that's where Kellogg's is from, right? Which is we eating today, right here, Battle Creek, Michigan. Question, did milk and cereals ever exist in the day of go-go or before for a breakfast in the way we do it today? No. It's a modern construct, and people like me do marketing to create that idea. I'm saying you've got more than an idea here, sir. You've got an ideal.
Sure.
So in closing out, would you say the Zimbabwean people are healthier today because of maize or less healthy today because of maize? Not to put you on the spot.
Okay, well, trust me. This is a story, as I'm saying. We are transitioning from maize to traditional grains. Go and check all the leftovers from where you are from. Most people ate traditional grains. So we need to learn to unlearn.
I don't think you can say it better. Thank you, Hillary.
Right, thank you.
Folks, may you get them back very safely by letting you go now. Bye-bye. You are released. Ministry of Agriculture. We love you guys. Let's do great things for the tomorrow. I was impacted by that. I think many diseases today are because of what we eat. Now we're going to go into the next debate. The rules and the construct of this are that the debate topics cannot be spoken Moderators will be called forward shortly and adjudicators. Would I please ask MSU to be upstanding? MSU, the mighty MSU, upstanding. Come forward, please. Versus Bendura University. Job section. Great presentation. You are what you eat. And now you are what you think, and you are what you speak. Prepare for the debate. MSU versus Bendura University. Acting Deputy Director for the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife. If I could call her forward, please, or him. Munashi Mukunawasheru. Thank you. Munashi. Yes. You can sit right next to these team here. Munashi looks young enough to be back at university in first year. And from Kubambura Law Chambers, could I please ask Moses to come forth? Moses, the erudite and the intelligent one. And could I ask you to sit on this side, sir? Well, no, you can sit next to the young lady. That's fine. Are we ready, folks? Okay, so no more than 5 minutes each. We're going to have to rock and roll this afternoon. Don't look at me like you're angry. Just take that energy into the PowerPointing that you're about to do. Come stand and face the people, people. Let's introduce you. Let's go. Come stand forward. Everyone come and stand and meet the people. Take a look at these faces, and then you're ready to go. And I'm handing over to you. Are you ready? Introduce yourself and the year that you're doing.
I'm Yuven Mudani, and I'm a Part 2 student at Bidra University.
Raymond Yashamoyo, Part 4 student at Bidra University.
My name is Charlene Shai. I'm a Part 5 student at Bidra University.
Are you guys going to win the debate?
Definitely.
It's a definite. We'll find out through our adjudicators. Sir,
Hi, I'm Ebenezer, second year at MSU.
what are you studying?
Marketing.
Marketing.
Augustine, third year law student, Woodland State University.
You do know that you can't go to law school with a hairstyle like that. Jokes.
Hi, my name is Lionel. I'm from MSU and I'm also a law student.
Are you guys going to win?
Definitely.
All right, we've got two definites, but they're going to be one definite winner, or maybe not. Are you ready to go? 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. No more. We're going to cut you off. Adjudicators, are you ready? Okay, let the debate begin. You can stand behind the podium. And we'll begin with you.
Wait, can I read out the motion first for everyone? Okay.
Right, the motion to be debated is about to be given, and folks, we're going to be tight on time. 3, 2, go.
Okay, so the motion for today's debate is NDC 3.0 targets should be conditional on the availability of international climate finance, with governments refusing to use domestic treasury funds to finance their implementation. What?
Sorry, folks, if I could, there's a Mercedes AGG 8642,
What?
it's blocking traffic, and there's a Ford Wildtrak, I think, AGP 0813. If you could please move your vehicles quickly, thank you so much.
Okay, sorry. The actual motion is this House believes that Zimbabwe's NTC 3.0 ought to be wholly conditioned upon international finance being made available. Okay, assuming I am audible, I am going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important to note that we already allowed the West to get away with slavery. We already allowed the West to get away with processes like colonialism. We were not reparated for all of the damages that were made. We cannot allow them to get away with environmental damage. Proud to propose. I'm going to do a couple of things here that are going to blow your mind. First, I'm going to give you an argument on climate justice, and secondly, why if you buy into whatever opposition will tell you, you worsen nation states and make them sink deeper into debt. So a couple of things to note in terms of key definitions. So, what are NDCs, right? So essentially NDEs are commitments that nation states make by virtue of being signatories of the Paris Agreement. So essentially you set out your mandate, the goals that you're going to reach, right? Essentially. And those particular goals are set out in terms of specific timeframes. And the one we're debating about is set out, is a goal set out to meet the 2035 goal, which is to like, mitigate specific climate issues until that particular specific time. And the NDC 3.0 is designed to ensure that nation states fulfill those goals before 2035. So there are two approaches. One, a conditional approach whereby we use international finance in order to solve the particular climate issues that as a nation state we're facing. Like for example, Zimbabwe getting like international finance in order to mitigate things like drought, etc. Or unconditional, whereby we use our own domestic resources in order to essentially fix these particular problems related to climate. I want to say something very nuanced here. Our burden in this debate is that we want it to be wholly conditional. So what does this mean? It essentially means that we want international financing. That is to say, we only want the international financing to take place for us to outsource these resources in order to be capacitated to solve the mandates that we have set out in our NDCs. We think that this does not mean we are abandoning climate issues that we are dealing with within our nation states. I think pertaining to the targets set out that we have domestically, we will still have the resources and we will still take measures to meet those particular social security issues related to climate change, like emergencies, etc. I think what we are necessarily debating here are instances whereby the mandates are internationally recognized by the Paris Agreement. So cool. In terms of like why now, I think already us trying to rely on domestic resources while it's also relying on international resources is failing. Nation states are constantly sinking deeper into debt, and we do not have the capacity to deal with the model we have in status quo. So we need this now. So my first argument, climate justice. Chair, it's important to note that Western nation states are the ones that are responsible, as I said, for the climate disaster we are facing. Global northern nation states are the ones that industrialized and built their wealth on the subjugation of the environment. It is important then that under the Article 9 Paris framework, that the actor or the individual who pollutes has the obligation to pay. That is to say, if you pollute as a nation state, you are obligated to pay and to solve that particular damage. Similarly, that is what we're doing in this particular instance. At a point in which we make a wholly conditional model, we are saying that Western nation states that were able to be financed and fueled by the destruction of the environment must ensure that they solve the pollution that they themselves created. I think it's unfair for you to put a burden on African nation states that are not necessarily the ones that contributed to the disasters that we're facing in terms of the environment throughout the world, and that are necessarily who do not have the capacity to do so. Before I go further, I'll take a POI.
Understand, the NDC 3.0 goals also exist to benefit Zimbabwe's climate justice, which means even if you are to get conditional international finance, it's only mutually benefiting the individuals that want.
Okay, so the thing about debating, we weigh benefits, right? We are saying to you that the benefits on our side are more important. Why? I'm going to show you as I go further. So, essentially, we are saying the alternative that Ray tells you, which is to say, like, they want to essentially have financing coming out from, like, their own capacity, is one that can't work. And why do we say that? Debt. We are telling you that in current status quo, Africa is currently dealing with primary issues like hunger, like unemployment. How in the hell are you possibly able to solve climate issues at a point in which you are in debt? That is why many nation states,
2 minutes.
that is why many nation states are actually now in current status quo taking and borrowing money from IMF, from Bretton Woods institutions in order to solve that debt. And that is why at the end of the day, nation states that take that money sink deeper and deeper into debt. In various circumstances like Pakistan and like many countries in South Africa, they have in some circumstances had to use natural resources in order to pay back the debt, or because they did not have the capacity to use their own domestic resources, they had to borrow money from the IMF institution. In closing, what we tell you is that we need the nation states that caused the problem to solve the problem. For all of these reasons, incredibly proud.
Thank you. He's certainly heard the spirit of pride. Now can it be counteracted? The floor is yours.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, what the government side is proposing to you, the government side is supposed to understand that this debate is not about how or who caused it, but how can we actually solve these climate problems that we are currently facing as Zimbabwe, not merely about who then caused them and how we can actually address these problems. And then I'm going to frame this debate and show you what wholly conditional means in our world. This is to say that every significant climate commitment is suspended unless external funding is provided, right? Under this model, we see to it that Zimbabwe would refuse to implement even those projects within their capacity, right, to be financed domestically. That only means that climate action only becomes possible after the permission of the international government or the funds when they are released, right? But then we show to you that in our world, we see to it that it only removes domestic responsibility and delays urgent action whenever international funding is unavailable or insufficient at that particular point. And then we also show to you why Zimbabwe should not build its climate strategy on resources that it cannot fully control. We see to it when that Zimbabwe is not in control of these things, it loses the sovereignty to then actually finance, or if that thing is within their capacity, it gives them or they lose particularly the power that they have at the end of the day, right? And then, so climate finance is often uncertain, delayed, and at times it is politically influenced, and also in most cases it's insufficient, right? So, we see to it that at times it might not even meet the national needs and also the national needs that we have as a particular country, right? So we believe that Zimbabwe in our own world or in the context of this debate should not do this, should not do what the government is proposing, because we believe in this, it only slows down the progress of the country, right? And we're going to show you why we think that Zimbabwe has the capacity to do this and deal with these problems by themselves, right? So, one, we see to it that Zimbabwe already possesses significant domestic capacity through its own natural resources. So then, Zimbabwe already has the capacity to solve these certain problems, such as high electricity problems. We see to it that as Zimbabwe, we have natural resources, we have dams, we have dams like Kariba, right, where we can simply then generate electricity, rather than seeking electric funds from people that are not within particularly our country. But we see to it that we have resources that we can then be able to use to achieve high electricity and solve the NDS problems that we have, right? I'll take you in my last minute. And then we also see to it that this is the only, and then we also see to it that we have renewable energy potential, where we could simply just then use the available resources that we have as a nation, such as in Zimbabwe, we have the biogas that we could easily implement, and also the Fumvuza program that could simply just then be implemented without seeking these these international funds, right? And then we also see to it that the Zimbabwe already has domestic revenue and existing government investments within the particular country or the economy. We also show to you that like already Zimbabwe has investments in agriculture and also infrastructure that has been developed, and also the energy that is being particularly produced at the end of the day, right? And then we also show to you how like the NDC is not just an objective to us as a community, but how it's something that is to be achieved as like Zimbabwe. It is like one of like the blueprints that is to be met by the Zimbabwe, and also how we're going to, at the end of the day, achieve energy security and also achieve industrialization at a particular protected time. So, if only these outcomes directly benefit Zimbabwe, then the government has both the incentive and the responsibility to invest in these programs using domestic funds, not public funds. With that, we are proud to oppose.
Thank you. Did you want to make a point? Go ahead.
Which sector do you suggest that we compromise funding for in order to fund these national projects?
Which sector?
We believe that we are going to use the agricultural sector and other financial that like do with the environment particularly, and then we get the funds and then we use them.
All right, strong domestic arguments, and I think we can continue onward. All right, our next debate. Recipient is ready to go. I'm looking forward to our adjudicators trying to pick this apart. Monashi and Moses. Good luck. All right, the podium is yours. Endura MSU, folks. 5 minutes.
Okay, I'd like to thank Team Opposition for that spirited attempt. I will begin in a couple of minutes. Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let us learn to tell this story properly. Climate commitments in the developing world does not begin with Gogo Sebanda chopping firewood, nor does it begin with Sekuru Temba's cows in his neighborhood, nor does it begin with Mashurugwi doing artisanal mining within their land. This story begins with colonial powers descending with an invisible thing that made blacks inferior and whites superior. It begins with that invisible thing that ensured that white people had power and property while black people had subjection and abjection. The long-term consequences of this are that while black people were dispossessed of their land and their wealth, it left many of these individuals living within poverty. Poverty which exists to this day, and which means that governments need to dedicate a significant amount of money into social spending. What then does this mean? It means that what you get from Rangobi is that a system that was created by these colonial powers that severed sustainable indigenous knowledge systems and replaced them with an ecosystem built on extraction, on taking, on distraction at the cost of environmental efforts. It means that we need to impute blame on those specific individuals. First, let's get into rebuttal before we get into our positive matter in this debate. Firstly, they tell you that NDCs benefit Zimbabweans and therefore we should divest all funding into NDCs regardless. Our response is that even if this is true, this doesn't mean that governments should still carry the full cost of this, for the very same reason that these properties, that like where these projects are commercially viable, private and international capital should be able to fund them to the same degree, because governments bear a responsibility in terms of the opportunity cost that is incurred at the point at which this happens. Cool. This debate has to be very comparative. So I'm going to go over this slowly and show you what the weighing is in this debate. First argument, we submit that tertiary climate spending has severe opportunity costs. What does this mean? An opportunity cost means that the money you would have otherwise spent on other things had you not needed to dedicate funding into highly ambitious NDCs will be lost as a result. What exactly is this opportunity cost? Developing nations need money, as you got from my first speaker, to invest into high capital costs, into healthcare, and into unsustainable debt obligations that exist from 2007 is economic structural adjustment programs. The reason why this happens, as I mentioned in my introduction, is that colonial history left many black people impoverished. In Zimbabwe, 46 years of independence have barely managed to create a large enough middle class, which means that most people are impoverished within these countries. What then does this mean? It means that burden to particularly protect these individuals then proceeds to fall on the government. What then is our mechanism in this debate? Our mechanism is that treasury-funded climate programs are going to frequently compete with the immediate needs of people on the ground. People who have actual human consequences, people facing hunger, people facing unemployment, healthcare, housing issues, which governments often need to subsidize because the level of poverty in these countries is so wide. What then is the consequence? The consequence in opposition's world is that you alienate and destabilize the very people who need these services. And this only succeeds in making these governments less popular because people would then blame all their issues on their governments, which ultimately leads to like destabilization and people losing faith in their governments, in instability, which ultimately does not yield the benefits that we need in today's debate. Comparatively, in our world, we submit that we refuse treasury funds because this is likely going to protect these core public services, which only arise as a result of this colonial history that destabilized economies and left many people far worse off than they otherwise would have been. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
Arwa concedes to all those problems, and she shows you that the debate is based specifically on the weighting and why it's harming the domestic implication of Zimbabwe. She shows you how it's most likely going to benefit at a point in time when we focus on ourselves in climate adaptation. Engage on that. Don't be smart.
Our second argument engages that exactly. Here's what happens. At a multilateral level, here is how we respond. We submit that conditionality creates pressure for fulfilling international finance obligations. What does this mean? These conditions at a Paris Agreement level, where countries set these NDCs, exist at a multilateral level. And the nature of multilateral agreements is that they're dependent on mutual buy-in by different countries, which means that the Paris Agreement, being multilateral, means that there are shared burdens within this. This is different from national policy at a national level, and as Lionel told you, you can already have climate relief within these countries at a point of emergency, which does not exist at the level of the Paris Agreement. What then is the problem in this debate? The problem is that international commitments are frequently ineffective. This is because nations often default from payments without consequence, which means that when they're unconditional, they get delayed. And the reason they get delayed is because they get delayed when developing countries with unconditional frameworks quietly carry the burden of finance implementation, which then allows developed nations to claim brownie points for climate progress without fulfilling their scale of financial obligation on a multilateral level. What then is the impact? The impact then is that conditionality turns climate finance from something that is vague and turns this money into something that is quickly liquid and allows these governments to invest directly into their nation states. Why then do we win this debate? Firstly, we prove to you in a principle of climate justice that the polluter pays and has to take care of the historical burden. Second, we show you why the opportunity cost is far too wide for it to be bared by governments on their own. And lastly, we prove to you how conditionality creates pressure and allows governments to fulfill their international finance obligations. Never been prouder to propose.
Benjura, strong. MSU, will they be stronger? Congratulations, we're nearly 2/3 through. Next speaker, up next. Thank you.
Okay. Starting in the next 3 seconds. Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Am I audible now? Okay, it's fine. Starting in the next 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. The problem with proposition is they are still debating the first motion, which was wrong. But secondly, is they are supposed to defend an idea of conditionality, which is something that I haven't literally seen within the first 2 speakers. So what I'm just going to do here is quickly take out opposition, because their entire idea is they want to create climate justice, which is the comparative on both sides, right? The first thing that Lionel says is that individuals still exist in hunger and unemployment, and we can't focus on that. But as Roy already shows to you, that at a point in time when you create diversification, it means that climate adaptation means the reassurance of creating agricultural sectors, water for hydroelectric projects, systems for solar panel businesses. What does this entail in the end? It means that you are more likely going to create employment opportunities for these development individuals, and most importantly, the hunger that you're trying to create is more likely going to be eliminated, which means that most of the problems that you speak about are more likely going to be incorporated in our world. But secondly, the most major thing that they fail to justify here is they can justify the weighting of why they want to literally depend upon international finance. More analysis did not come from this because they didn't have much context on this, but I'll engage them as I move into my positive matter. The first thing that I'm going to do is show you that what we aim to do from government is we want to establish a form of climate identity under our own roots as Zimbabwe. There are 4 reasons to support this. Firstly, the idea is to have an understanding of the environmental impacts associated with international funding. If we buy into what the first speaker says, the whites themselves have literally ran away with everything. But understand, we are literally here and we are left ourselves with the little that we have, and we want to ensure that we can build from that. And that's exactly how the identity in itself is most likely going to be maximized. Because these NDC 3.0 goals do not focus on building the West, do not focus on building the East. They focus on building us, but most importantly, on progressing exactly the types of systems that we exist in, the types of climate, the types of climate that we literally breathe in, the type of climate that we are breathing in right now. Secondly, it means, as Ro already shows to you, international finance is usually contingent on building a benefit that we're most likely not going to literally align with. It literally has delays, usually not adequate, but most importantly, it's most likely not going to be reliable within those specific forms of instances. We think we can't literally be conditional upon it. The impact here is pretty simple. What we want to achieve is NDC 3 goals, but the weighting in itself is killing the economy, but most importantly, draining it in ways that we can usually maximize or sustain it, right? But secondly, it ensures that people, on our side, we ensure that people are fully equipped. That is to say, when we literally have disasters, such as the El Nino-induced drought, we can easily have independent ways into solving this. That is to say, to literally ensure that you can literally progressively, foster foods to the individuals that are literally suffering within these instances. We think this can only be established at a point in time when you understand that the reason why we are suffering is because we literally want to be contingent and dependent specifically on a non-realistic system that is most likely not going to help us. But thirdly, the adaptation and techniques of mitigation method when faced with these issues. Literally, when Ebe asked the pure sectors being literally sacrificed, it's not mostly about that, but it's the diversification. That is to say, what are we going to be doing within the agricultural sector? I think a presentation was just about then 5 minutes ago, which shows you that we can literally improve within those specific things. The ideas of how we can literally conserve carbon sinks into literally achieving the emission, the reduction of 40% emission carbon footprints is the NDC 3 goals wants to achieve in the long run. The second thing here is that the conservation on the local soil we literally stand on. A tipping point which is established, resistant mechanism which wants to improve most of these sectors. We think we are more likely equipped to do this on our side of the house. Go ahead.
Just quickly, in your world, how do you reduce carbon emissions, for example?
Okay, so I think the trick here is pretty simple. Carbon emissions is us adapting to climate systematic methods, right? For example, this is to say in the electric sector, we literally prioritize renewable resources such as water, solar, in terms of the types of projects that we are literally doing. I think this is really simple here. Impact here. Understand, climate adaptation in our side is going to be seen as a normal part of life, which means everyone, individuals, is most likely going to be aware and most likely going to progress within these specific things, right? But most importantly, we are going to have a specific form of economic stability, because the progression of this climate adaptability means individuals themselves are going to understand exactly what the climate literally looks like. Literally, in just conclusion, we all understand the vision is to be achieved in 2030, but as our famous president always says in his quotes, "Nyika inowakwa nive nevayo." Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a point you wanted to make? We're nearly there. Moses and Munashi, get ready. We'd love to hear your adjudication before we take the vote. I think we have one left. The last shall be first. Or will he? Complex ideas, folks, brought down into
I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. The one thing that the opposition does not understand is what the debate is about in essence. The debate is about the conditional funding of the NDCs, not whether or not Zimbabwe will become climatized or climate friendly. That's not what the debate is. Which means that the comparison on our world is a world in which we are doing things at our own pace and at our own time. So the comparison that Ray tries to make you seem like we're doing is the false comparison. We are saying that the expensive demands of NDCs, for example, I asked him a very specific question. What does a reduction of carbon emissions look like, right? It means in instances whereby something you would have to pay extra money. For example, there's some technology that you need for you to put when you are producing things that produce a lot of CTO that break down. Those things cost money. Meaning that if a development project hypothetically costs $1 billion and we're going to get $1 billion from it, in our world, for us to comply with NTCs, we'd have to spend 2 or 3 billion in order to comply. We are saying, unless they give us the money to do so, we are going to produce things the way we want to and get the full extent of the profit that we're trying to realize, rather than curbing our potential for economic growth at the expense of these NDCs. That is exactly what the debate and the comparison ought to be. Don't allow them to make the debate what it's not. A few things also the same response. They make the debate seem like the debate is about if we are waiting to build national projects like dams and things like that, if we don't have foreign funding. That's not the context in the debate, Ray. The debate is, when we're building our dams, if they want us to build our dams in a manner that is compliant with NTCs, they have to fund the compliance. But we're still going to do all those projects what we're going to do. But it means that the expensive infrastructure needed for us to comply with NTC is not going to come from our own pocket. Why? Because in our world, and in the way in which you listen to our framing, we view these climate agreements as an extension of colonial power and neo-colonialism. Let me explain. What the West does is they develop themselves to a level where they're very developed. And when you're not undergoing the same process of development, they say, no, you can't do this. You need to implement these expensive policies first. We think, therefore, as far as climate justice is concerned, if they want us to follow their way, or if they want us to follow the way in which they did things under the climate agreements, they need to pay for that. That's the basic principle. We are going to do so at our own pace. So what she talks about when we say we want to build dams and electricity, we're still going to do that. But our point is, when we're doing that, we're not going to necessarily comply to NDCs. We're going to do it at our own pace. If they want us to comply to the agreements that they make in Paris and all those other fancy countries, they need to pay for it. That's a simple principle, Ray. I broke it down so you can understand quickly.
But you're still debating the first motion.
No, I'm not.
Speaks about the war conditional part. Please engage.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying it's wholly conditional. Unless they pay for it, we will not comply. I think that's very clear what wholly conditional means, Ray. I don't know why you keep making it seem like, I don't know, right? So let me reinforce another thing that they talk about, right? I asked them at PUI, the first speaker, I asked, which sectors are you willing to sacrifice in order for you to implement this policy? She says agriculture. Ray tries to do a cover-up job, but we heard the mess up in the first speech. Let me explain why that mess up is detrimental to their case. Listen, anyone knows that to implement the policies that the West wants us to do when you go to those G20s and finance conferences, they cost money and are expensive. For you then, it means that if you're then funding this particular process, something has got to give. Opportunity cost that Augustine talks about. They need to tell us where are they getting the money to fund the expensive projects that are required for us to be compliant with NTC. We don't get any response in terms of that. They're running first for fourth in losing this debate, right? But also, we tell you that they talk about how we want to be, our policies will be dependent on foreign investment and foreign countries and sovereignty. That is not the case. In fact, our team proposes sovereignty. We told you two things. A, it does not stop our development, right? So we are not dependent on that. So it doesn't mean if we don't get money, we won't build. We will still build our dams, we'll still build our electricity, we'll still fund our mfumvudza. But what we're saying, if they want us to do our mfumvudza in the way that they told us when they sat down in the fancy rooms in Paris, they just need to pay for it. If they're not willing to pay for, we'll continue with our projects the way in which we can afford and in a sustainable manner. You don't get that debate, Ray. I don't know why. Yes, she needs to come and do a very good saving job at the last speaker, right? So let me summarize in terms of our debate and further explain what we're then saying. A few things, right? At the cornerstone of our argumentation is climate justice and neo-colonialism, right? We are saying that we view these agreements most of the times, even though they're well-intentioned, the implementation of them are fundamentally neo-colonialistic. If they believe in their sincerity and if they believe genuinely that things are necessary for saving the country, why then do they not pay for it? We think we don't understand that analysis at all. But secondly, we're saying that when it comes to climate justice, we want to have a situation where we're able to develop. In fact, I'm even tempted to say, Why do we even bother going to these funny agreements anyway when they don't treat us with the respect that we deserve? Every time we go to those places, they have a list of demands of what Africans must do and things like that. In fact, if you were to give me a chance, I'll even tell you why we should have our own agreements as African countries to do with climate in the way in which we understand it, to do with climate in a way that incorporates our national interest and budget. At no point in time are we going to sacrifice the minerals of our countries to comply to agreements made in Paris with disregard for our development. At no point in time are we going to allow our sovereignty to suffer at the hands of agreements that they aren't willing to fund themselves. Why are victims paying when the perpetrators are running around scot-free of their crimes? We don't understand the principle. That's a principle that you need to justify. They try to make us debate a motion that says that we're going to be dependent and we're not going to do anything unless we get that money. That's exactly our point. But they're not going to do anything that we are talking about, is that we're not going to do anything that they want us to do. We're going to do things that are on pace. We care about climate, and sustainability. We care about climate and sustainability as a country, but what we're saying, the way in which we who care for our environment, I mean, we've been caring for our environment even before colonialism. Our ancestors knew how to live in harmony in the environment. In fact, they're the individuals who created a culture of extractivism that destroys the very environment. So for us to be lectured by the very same people who polluted the world about how to operate our own individual climate is fundamentally ridiculous. In conclusion, what are we saying? We are saying that climate issues, as we understand them as Zimbabwean African, we are going to implement them. If they want us to implement it in their way, they need to pay for it. If they're not willing to pay for it, that's our condition of implementing. If they are not willing to pay for it, we'll do it ourselves and on our own terms. Proud.
Thank you.
Thank you. Am I audible? Okay, beginning my speech in the next 3 seconds. In 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, listening is a skill that can be taught in school, but listening to understand is a virtue that you ought to work on yourself. Listen, the motion clearly states, this House believes that Zimbabwe's NDC-3 ought to be wholly conditional upon international finance being made available. The debate is not about the conditions that are going to come upon that finance, right? The debate is, why then should we wait for that finance to come first before we start any action? What government ought to justify within their speeches was the whole idea in which why, as Zimbabweans, we do not have the capacity, right, to start climate action within the capacity that we have in terms of bettering our nation, right? Why then do we have to wait upon that funding to be available before we act, right? We think the whole idea within how they got the wrong motion is exactly what led us into this whole disaster, right? Moving on into their case, right? What then do they say within this debate? They tell us the idea of how the West has already gotten away with a lot of things, right? And we can't let them get away with the environmental harms that they are currently perpetrating, right? What then do we tell you within this contribution? We tell you, number one, we think OG is generally losing from the perspective of viewing ourselves as victims, right? At a point in time in which you want to wait for somebody to reparate you, you restrict the potential that is dormant within you in terms of developing your own self to maximize in terms of how you're going to create the sustainability, right? We think ideally there are a lot of cost-effective methods that we can use to make sure that we start that action. Within which many people are chopping down trees to use as a source of energy, right? In the moment in which you introduce things like biogases in those raw areas, it means we are taking a greater step in terms of how we're going to act towards the climate. I think we're ideally disappointed in you lawyers for making that point, right? They tell us the idea of how the nation is going to sink deeper into debt. Two things in terms of responses here. You need to understand, panel. At a point in time in which you want to view this as a reparatory action, right, you are losing within this debate. You need to view it as a form of investment. Why do I say so? Zimbabwe itself is largely structured on how the agricultural sector is buying more into the economy, right? It means it's generally an investment. At a point in time in which we wait and we have things like prolonged droughts, we have things like cyclone Idai constantly, I'll take you in my last minute, constantly coming in to harm that agricultural economy, right? You are most likely losing. At a point in time in which you introduce environmentally friendly farming techniques, right, it means you're investing in the agricultural sector itself, right, to make sure that your land is continuously going to be arable, right, so that you can invest much more into that and gain more results in terms of like how you're going to support your nation and how you're going to support your economy. We think at a point in time in which you want to like make it seem like we're only taking climate action to like cater for the harms that existed. You are wrong. We need to see this as a form of investment to secure our future and to secure our economies. I'll take you, Ebe.
What you're not understanding is that we are not saying Zimbabwe should not do climate issues. We are saying that if they want us to do our climate issues in the way which they're telling us to do so, they should pay for it. If they're not willing to pay for it, we'll do it in our own way, like Fumbuza that you're talking about. So you're always misunderstanding what the motion is.
The problem is, Ebe, you did not read the motion. The motion clearly says that NDC3 ought to be wholly. The whole idea of wholly means like we need to completely wait for that funding to be there before we take action. What we deny is that whole waiting period. We have the capacity to act now. Why then do we have to wait for things like bureaucratic red tape? Because funds aren't just going to wake up and be like released, right? It means there are processes that are going to be made, and these processes are going to like slow down our action in terms of like how we are going to buy into that climate action, right? We think the whole idea in which they come and tell us that we are victims and how the West needs to like deny it, I'm in my protected time, and how like the West need to reparate us on how we have been harmed. We have a wrong mindset in terms of like buying into climate, right? We need to act. We need to invest in our own futures. We have the capacity. It is not a factor of like having a lot of millions of dollars to buy into this. It is a factor of taking those small steps. We do not dispute funding being there from the West. We do not dispute the whole idea of how then at the end of the day there are going to be conditions. We don't dispute that. What government ought to have like justified within this debate was the whole idea of why we need to wholly wait upon that funding to be available before we can act. We say act now because we have the capacity. A nation is built by its people, and brick by brick we will make it. Proud to oppose.
Powerhouse. So ladies and gentlemen, on this wonderful afternoon, we've got the wonder of debate. Wonderful. And now, left two mighty minds. Moses, thank you. If you could come forward from the Lord Chambers of Kupabatara, Tura, and if I could have Munashi as well from the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife. Beautiful to have both of you. Quick commentary from each, and then we're going to go into your adjudication.
Yes, generally, what I observed when they were presenting, there seems to be having a misconception on both sides of the debate. Secondly, the drafter of the motion also needs to be.
Is audio down? All right, let's try that again. Legal minds giving a legal opinion, but good to listen.
I was saying, on the drafter of the topic, this seems to give the parties a problem. Because when they say whole, it means the country has to stop everything until funding. When we say that, it became difficult for the parties to convince.
So you see perhaps some convergence of ideas?
Yes.
Possibly. And how do you see it?
Firstly, let me say I'm really impressed by all of the arguments that were said today. I think the topic is really a matter of perspective, but then again, this is a debate. It's about how well you put your point across. I don't know if now is the time to go into more detail on my comments for each, or if there's been
Now is the time. The time is now, and we want to hear your vote, and we appreciate it. But before you do that, gather your thoughts. Moses, upstanding. Could I please have both beautiful university representatives all standing up? I'd like you at the front so people can see your handsome faces. Thank you. Are we ready? Face the audience, because the jury is about to rule. And then you get to vote. Not fun? Right, let's hear it. Moses, I'll come back to you, your thoughts, and who's won today's debate.
From my side, as a legal person, I have already edited the motion to remove the whole causes of the problem first. That's the only way you can solve a problem effectively. And we also have a historical background on this issue. Second, or thirdly, this issue is global. You cannot do it as Zimbabwe, but it has to be done as a global. So the global funding is a necessity, given the historical background.
So your vote? Who wins the debate?
Those who are supporting the conditional.
That must be Bindura. All right.
Okay, just some comments and maybe a few pointers for future debates. Starting with your team, you're from? MSU? Okay, I think you came up with really strong arguments. I really liked the fact that you presented the polluter pays argument. Also highlighted that we'll be put into further debt if we are to go with the notion that the developing countries are meant to also take up the onus in terms of addressing issues to do with climate change from our own fiscus. I also like that you mentioned the articles in the Paris Agreement, which clearly stipulate that developed countries have the onus, and it's their right, and the onus is on them to provide climate finance for addressing issues to do with climate change. And then I think the last speaker also spoke to the issue of common but differentiated responsibilities, where he highlighted that if they're setting the rules and the precedents, then the money should be able to come from them. However, if that's not the case, we will develop eventually, but at our own pace, using our own frameworks and guidelines, which might not always be climate resilient as well as low carbon, but we will get there. And I think that's where the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities comes in. So that was also a really good argument. From this team, you're from Buse. I would like to say you did come across with some pretty strong arguments as well. But the topic was mainly focusing on mitigation, which looks at reduction and sequestration of greenhouse gas emissions. I like that you did bring up adaptation interventions to come in and as a solution for financing some of these, but really when we're talking about NDC, it's mainly focusing on mitigation. So I would have liked to see probably you present on how as government or as Zimbabwe, we can also look at other financial resources within the country, not just focusing on the fiscus or treasury, but we can tap into maybe private sector. You also mentioned, I think you mentioned carbon payment on carbon emissions. So you could have mentioned also carbon taxes or climate change and carbon related taxes and levies to also strengthen your argument. But I think for this debate, I will have to go with MSU.
Thank you. Now, from Moses to the people, let's divide the Red Sea. Who has won today, folks? To my right or to my left? To my right and to my left? It was close, but it seems that you are the debate winners with the populace today. However, you have great support, wonderful arguments. Congratulations, everybody. Thank you, adjudicators. Thank you, Moses. Wonderful. Thank you, Manashi. Thank you for making the time. Real intelligence and passion combined. Harare Polytechnic versus Manicaland State University of Science. If you could be upstanding, come forth. And the rules are going to change a little bit now. And in the wings, Chinoy University and Lupani State University, if you would be in the wings. Good luck. Come forward, team. Now, in the sake of time, we're going to reset the clocks. lot of interest, Gary, from the students. Some of them may say, how do we capitalize on this opportunity? How do we, like the first question that we had, how do they benefit? So fortunately enough for us, the debate team is coming through. We've got a lady, Christina from Preston. She sits in the board of the capital markets. So she's going to just give it 2 minutes and explain what is a collective investment scheme and how students can come collectively for them to be able to be bankable. I think I touched on that, but she is the expert. And so Christine, just 3 minutes of your time. So let's clap hands. So we have also gender balance. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Ben had said a lot, but what I can just say is I'm here to talk about collective investment schemes in short. It's when you own something collectively. For example, in terms of climate, one of the methodologies on natural resources, for example, road district councils can come together collectively, their forests into one, and we can divide according to the RDCs, the number of RDCs that so and so has got so much units. So it's like you contribute something into one pot, but sharing it equitably, not equally, according to what they've contributed. So in terms of climate, the way that you can raise finances as students is when you get maybe funding, you can do small gardens or perma gardens and maybe hectares of land, and it can be registered as a carbon credit itself, and you'll be allocated your units collectively. So this, the benefit of collective investment scheme is that it's accountable, it's transparent, it's audited. So it is very clean and very smart, and there is no shortcomings. There is no someone who's going to say that I was shortchanged, because the way it's done, the way it's set through a trust deed, and the trust is a legally binding document. So all the parties to the trust deed are clearly, their duties, roles, responsibilities are clearly defined in the trust deed, which is registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's the one that regulates the capital markets. In short, that's what I can say about collective investment schemes. Thank you.
Wow, that was pretty precise, concise. We're still processing it, but thank you. All right, folks, I think you're hearing is a mechanism to deal with ideas, ideals, and then to turn it into investment. So thank you, Ben, for that. Now, we're going to throw a little bit of an El Nino debate hurricane into your world right now, young people. Welcome to life. Is that okay? Because you prepared for today. You've got your 20 minutes down, and that 20 minutes is being cut to 2. I know, it makes no sense, but life doesn't make sense, and I'm throwing it at you to say be ready. Your arguments will be strong. We've got 2 universities and 20 minutes. I want to get these arguments in, out, dusted, and we're going to take a vote. Adjudicators are on standby. Now, it doesn't mean to say you can't argue strong, but you just can't argue long. All right, here we go. The weather changes all the time, so does life. Could I please have upstanding? Harare Polytechnic. Upstanding. Please be upstanding. Harare Polytechnic, could you please come forward and face the audience? Thank you. That's Harare Polytechnic. Harare Polytechnic is facing Manicaland State University of Science. Can I please have you upstanding and facing the audience? I know you're shell-shocked. You prepared for 20 minutes. And 2 has been given you. Don't worry, you'll make it work. Adjudicators, Hannah Makanaka, please could I have you upstanding? From the selection, Bukusi, Solomon Ndebele, upstanding, thank you. And Belinda Mukulutuli, upstanding. All right, adjudicator, could you please come forward and face the audience? Thank you. The debate motion. This House believes that electric and non-motorized transport solutions are the most viable path to climate-smart mobility in Zimbabwe. Teams, are you ready for the topic? ready for the topic. If you're not ready, just nod with confidence, because it'll make no difference anyway. The mic will be passed to you. You will have 2 minutes with everyone watching you. The rules have changed. The game changes. Weather changes. Prepare to defend your argument, and then I'll come across to you, and then back to you, and then back to you, and then we'll have rebuttals. Are you ready? I know you're not. Go. If you want to go to a podium, that's fine, but if you'd like to start from here.
If you want to come to a podium, you can, but it's going to be 2 minutes each. Would you prefer to go from there? Fine, go.
Okay, so I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a problem. What is our problem? Climate change. What is the reason why we've gotten to a point where we have climate change? Is because of carbon emissions. What are the things that are contributing to carbon emissions? We have industries that are, for example, coal industries and all that, but what is the other reason? We have transport, right? So this is the reason why we've come together here and we're now talking about transport solutions. Now, the motion has told us that we, as a house, are actually proposing that electric and non-motorized transport solutions are the most viable path to climate smart mobility. Now, let's talk about the problem that we have at hand. Electric vehicles, these are, for the context of this debate, are going to be powered fully by electricity rather than internal combustion engines, right? Non-motorized transport systems, these are going to prioritize and rely entirely on human-powered mobility, and we're also going to talk about viability and what it looks like in the context of this debate. Okay, so viability looks like we are looking at a solution that is practical, that can work in the long run, a solution that is very applicable in the context of Zimbabwe, right? Why do we think that it is very possible for us to use non-motorized transport? Because, as we have told you, it looks like non-motorized solutions, like walking, like tricycling, like wheelchairs, right? We think that for anyone who has common sense, you would know that obviously if it's a short distance, you can walk. If it's longer than that, you can now use a tricycle. If it's even longer, you can then now use electric transport solutions, right? So we think that we've answered the question that might have come from the opposition as to what we're going to do in terms of long distances. Right now, let's tackle something else, right? We are going to talk about the practicability of this. Currently, Zimbabwe is actually the lead reserve in terms of lithium. Lithium is currently, or is actually like the most important resource where EVs are concerned, because we have lithium batteries that we use for this, right? So what does that mean? That means that as Zimbabwe, we have the capability to actually handle this entire thing of electric vehicles because we have the lithium to do that. So some will come and now say, oh no, but we have Chinese that are operating these mines like Bikita Minerals and Acadia mines and all that. But we would like to point out to you that this is very possible, and we support that this is very practical, because as of February 2026, we actually had a ban on exporting raw and unprocessed lithium, right? So we think that it is very possible, and it is very practical for us to do this. We also have an e-mobility policy that is currently running in Zimbabwe for the Vision 2030, right? The transition towards sustainable transport, national e-mobility policy, and market readiness framework developed alongside the UNEP Climate Tech Center and Network. The target is to reduce transport emissions by 40% per capita by 2030, right? And how are we strategizing and implementing this? Number one, we have financial incentives and import regulations to stimulate market penetration and to make EVs competitive against ICE, right? And these include, number one, reduction in import duties. For example, we have 40 to 25% reduction for electric vehicles, right? That means that makes it more competitive against ICEs, making it very practical and making it very economic for us to use these. Number two, we have zero duty on agricultural EVs, for example, tractors. That means that 0% customs duty rate to encourage green farming, right? Number three, we have disincentivizing older vehicles. For example, imported fossil fuel vehicles older than 5 years face a heavy 35% straight tax. That means that now we are encouraging the entire EV plan that we have talked to you about, right? What capacity do we think that we have? The government accelerates export policies in February 2026, implementing an immediate suspension of the export of raw minerals and lithium, which is what we have mentioned before. Now, there's other path. That's why we are now arguing on the context of viability, not on the fact that
1 minute.
Okay or not, right? What we are mainly talking about in this debate is what is the most viable path. There are other paths, and we acknowledge that, but we have the current problem that we have to solve. So the question is, what is this using solar systems, so we do not have to even burden the electricity grids that are supposed to be burdened,
Thank
even
you.
if we did not have solar. Thank you.
Thank you. You packed a lot in there, and I know you weren't prepared. Welcome to life. Next up. Little tip, maybe get us one big idea in 3 minutes instead of 300 incredible ideas in one.
I'll start in 3, 2, 1. So, we got 2 main points from the government side. Number one, we have lithium, and therefore we are in a great position to start using electric vehicles in the country. Well, we have lithium, and then what else do we have? It's not just lithium. You don't just mine lithium and then you have an electric vehicle all of a sudden. Number one. Number two, what about mining itself? What do you use to mine? We use a lot of fossil fuel powered vehicles, right? Fossil fuel energy powered vehicles. The heavy mining equipment that we use ends up causing a lot of emissions, right? They talked about how we have solar panels, right? How we have a lot of sunshine in Zimbabwe, and therefore we can start utilizing that sunshine. A point in which we'll get into when we start our argument, right? So, a theme that we had repeated over and over in this summit was idea plus real equals ideal, right? They have the idea, but then they don't have the real part. We're going to explain why they don't have the real part. Number one, rolling out these electric-powered vehicles has many problems. Our first problem is that we have a weak electricity service provision system in the country currently, right? The service provision system is failing to even support the households that are in it, right? We have about a deficit of 1,000 megawatt hours of electricity currently, right? And then you want to add electric vehicles. You want to bank the entire transportation system of the country on that weak system. It cannot fly, right? Number two, we have the high acquisition costs. That's not practical in a country like Zimbabwe, right? Because electric-powered vehicles, the base vehicles, right? Right now, there's also it's still new technology. It's still high in demand, right? So the acquisition cost is therefore driven up. How much money are Zimbabweans making to be able to afford even the basic electric vehicles when it costs up to $50,000 in the countries that is being made? We're not even talking about the import cost and the transportation system is going to take to bring it to the country here in Zimbabwe, right? That's number two, why electric vehicles cannot be viable in the country that is Zimbabwe, right? We also have how dirty the electricity in Zimbabwe already is in and of itself, right? We're using coal-based, we're using coal, right? We're using coal to get this electricity in the first place. And then you want that coal to produce, which already produces like 50% of the electricity in the country. You want that coal to be powering the electric vehicle. What we've done already here, ladies and gentlemen, is just change the exhaust pipe. We just removed the exhaust pipe from the car into the electricity service providers of the country because they are going to be using these electric vehicles. Now we have another problem of non-motorized vehicles, right? Most of the people in the CBD, right, this is the people who are using these motorized vehicles in the first place. Most of the people in the CBD live far away, right? They live in Ruach, Tungwiza, we have Domboshava, right? Can that person use a bicycle? It's too far away, right, for them to start using a bicycle, right? What about the infrastructure it takes for us to then depend on, for us to then say a lot of people start using bicycles, right? We don't even have cycle tracks. A lot of the roads have a lot of potholes, right? You've been in the CBD, ladies and gentlemen. Which is better, to drive in the CBD or to ride a bicycle in the CBD? You've seen the amount of people who are there, right? So what is our case as the opposition side, right? We are saying revive the NRZ, right? The National Railways of Zimbabwe system. Why? Because when we start transporting goods for a a long distance, right, we're going to use up to just a third of the fuel it takes for trucks to be moving across that distance. That's a more viable solution for Zimbabwe. And that solution, right, it also reduces the emissions. Number two, we have the adoption of efficient vehicles, right, by the masses. A point which I loved because it came from the government side itself, right? A point that says that we are going to be ditching older cars for newer diesel, petrol-powered cars, right? That's going to be efficient, but at the same time, it's going to help our case as the opposition side. And our last point, optimizing the public transportation system. Why? Because when you optimize this public transportation system, it incentivizes people to drop their cars, and therefore when a lot of people drop their cars for this public transportation system, we have less cars on the roads and we have reduced emissions. I rest my case.
Thank you so much. I know this is a serious debate, but I just can't help it. When I look at you, if Chris Rock was young and intelligent, he'd be you. I know it's a curveball. I know that you've got to go quick. Maybe get us to understand one key point. The time starts now.
Am I audible? So I'm starting 3, 2, 1. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what I failed to establish from this debate is that the opposition came here, but they showed no understanding of what we said. They were talking about electric shortage, but they came and addressed that we shall not be dependent on the electric grid that we have in Zimbabwe, but we are going to generate and build our own electric grid that shall support electrical charging of these e-mobile vehicles. What are we saying, ladies and gentlemen? We shall establish solar charging panels, ladies and gentlemen, around the nation. We shall also help develop electricity in the abandoned sectors. We shall look at the rural areas and the pre-urban areas that have electrical shortage at the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, they came and talked about mining, how we are using fossil fuels and already causing climate damage. We are here saying that in the next 3 years there shall be an establishment of a mining program called the Culture Project. You shall hear about it if you are really in research. This shall be using solar energy so as to directly mine in all sectors, ladies and gentlemen. We are here going to talk about powering these vehicles. Is that the same with what you said with the electrical shortage? We shall not be using the electricity being provided by ZESA. We are building our own thing. Ladies and gentlemen, solar synergy is our point. We are saying Zimbabwe receives over 3,000 hours of sunshine. We shall channel that energy into powering e-mobile vehicles, and it shall not only change the transportation problem, it shall not only solve this transportation problem, but it shall engage in providing sustainable energy into clinics, into providing sustainable energy into the cities, because after hours we have this energy being stored into these lithium batteries that we are developing. We shall store energy that shall later be used to supply the traffic lights, supply into clinics, and make the electric state of the city sustainable. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you have to say?
I would like to ask the audience, which is more viable, the 3 solutions we gave, or to completely revamp and re-engineer 53% of Zimbabwe's electricity system?
We are not re-engineering, ladies and gentlemen. We are actually just improving the energy cycle that we already have, ladies and gentlemen. What are we saying? To win this debate, we have to have an individual who shows us who has the most realistic view of Zimbabwe's energy and road infrastructure. They have talked about the road infrastructure as it is. We shall create an infrastructure that supports, that is viable cycles and walking pathways for every individual. That's saying those people that are walking in the CBDs, ladies and gentlemen, shall be protected and they shall be provided with reliable and safe walking pathways, ladies and gentlemen. That means if if you want to cycle in the city, if you want to cycle and walk in the CBDs, you shall have no problem. And we shall also solve the problem of traffic lights and easy walking in the CBDs during nighttime. We see that there is no traffic lights viable in all parts of the
1 minute.
city.
1 minute. Keep going. 1 minute.
So, we shall also be capturing the domestic value chain. We see that Zimbabwe possesses some of the largest hard rock lithium reserves in Zimbabwe, in the world. They have asked about what we are going to do with this lithium chain. We say that instead of just prioritizing the exportation of lithium, we shall ourselves prioritize processing it and building our own sustainable lithium batteries so as to help in the powering and engaging in this e-mobile power situation, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Closing point. Thank you. I think it's been said. Done and dusted. All right, the rules have changed. We're speeding up. Next speaker. Thank you.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So now, we do acknowledge your ideas which you give us, right? But now, what we need to do is to give you a reality check of what is actually happening in Zimbabwe, what is actually in plan in Zimbabwe, right? Number one, Zimbabwe is failing Zimbabwe is failing to actually reinvent or to actually Zimbabwe is actually failing to actually control its or to reinvest in its infrastructure, right? This is the first problem which we face in Zimbabwe, right? And then number two, Zimbabwe is actually failing to supply electricity throughout the whole country, right? That is a big problem which we have, which actually affects that idea which we give us a side opening government, right? And then what we give you a side opposition, right, is we talk about sequence grid reality, right? Energy and infrastructure gap, right? We talk about the distance between safe station which we have actually managed to acquire, right? Imagine if we are to say no at each safe station, we are going to be putting these charges for these vehicles, right? Imagine the expenditure which is one of the biggest point in this debate, right? We feel like this is expensive because Zimbabweans actually can't afford to buy bikes for themselves, right? What has led us currently to have vehicles or a transport system is the need to transport goods to and from locations, right? So we feel like we are going back to using bicycles traveling for long distances. Can you say you can travel from Harare to Gweru using an electric bike, right? And then considering the current infrastructure, also roads which you have currently, we have potholes and we have dead roads which we have in Zimbabwe, right? Can you travel for 20 kilometers by a bike in roads with which have potholes, right? And then number two, we feel like we already have hybrid cars which are half electric and actually use fossil fuels, right? If you check currently, these vehicles are facing problems because of dust, because of the infrastructure, right? Why don't we say we first fix the problems which we currently face in Zimbabwe, the problems of infrastructure, and then we go on to developing this transport system, right? And in this debate, what we all acknowledge is, yes, there is climate change is being caused by these emissions, right? Yes, we do acknowledge that, but practically, do we say that if we are to engage with the proposition given by said opposition, can we say that Zimbabwe will actually advance? No, this is problematic. So what do we say? What do we stand for as a said opposition? Right? We feel like if we are to implement, if we are to engage with your idea, there will be an increase in demand. How is this problematic? Right? We feel like yes, we have iPhones which are currently running, right? But every time there is a new upgrade to that iPhone, people can't afford it. So we feel like if we are to introduce these EVs, right, people aren't going to afford these EVs. This is going to be problematic. Checking for reality, let's say reality currently, people can't afford a Tesla, it costs 30,000. This is problematic, right? So we feel like as much as we want to solve the problem of climate change, right, let us do it slowly, but firstly, we need to actually advance, or let's say we need to actually improve our infrastructure, we need to actually improve our conditions to actually accommodate those EVs which you want us to introduce in in this house, right? What else do we stand for, right? We feel like it is very difficult to actually transport 30 tons of steel using using an electric transportation bike. This is problematic, right? So we feel like with the current system which we have, yes, it's causing emission and climate change. It's actually important and actually efficient in this debate, right? So now, what do we stand for instead of opposition? What do we propose, right? We feel like yes, currently emission is there because of amount of vehicles which we have, right? But what we suggest is yes, let's actually renovate and reinvest in the NRZ, right? We feel like those trucks which are being transported every day with the tankers, or let's say 50,000, which are being transported every day and actually emitting gases into the air, right? We feel like this is problematic. So we feel like if we are to reinvest in NRZ, this means that the gases which are emitted by 50,000 cars are reduced, right? And then only one train is actually emitting those gases, right? So this shows that yes, climate change will be reduced. The problems within the climate are going to be reduced, right? And then what do we get from side opposition? Side opposition comes and then tell us that no, they're going to be transporting people or say goods using electric systems in Zimbabwe. The question is, can we say a Tesla can travel from Harare to Blawa without being charged? That is problematic. That is practical, right? In Zimbabwe, we have managed to attain a system where we have a radius of about 20 kilometers and then we find a safe station, right? So can we say Zimbabwe can actually afford to have to have at least 30, let's say to have 20 chargers, 20 cars, 20 vehicle chargers at each safe station, right? We feel like this actually results in a problem of queues, right? We feel like the current system which we have currently, which accommodates 3 cars to be saved at safe station or petrol to be saved within 3 minutes, is actually efficient rather than having 50 cars waiting to be charged the whole day and you're waiting to travel or you're waiting to transport things, right? So
Thank you. Closing minute. Thank you. Closing minute.
Are you saying that Zimbabwe continues to only be importing fossil fuels during this time where Iran and America are making it actually difficult for us to acquire electric vehicles?
No. What we feel like, yes, it's expensive to actually acquire these fossil fuels, right? This is the problem which currently lands within this debate, right? But what we feel like is, yes, we want to develop. That is what we want. But we do it at our own pace. Don't rush things. Don't rush to buy these cars when these cars can't run in your roads which you have in Zimbabwe. So we feel like we have to at least develop the current roads, and then we'll continue buying those fuels, even though they're expensive. But until we actually manage to have an accommodative system for those vehicles, we're going to run current system which we have with this arrest makers.
Thank you. Succinct, powerful, passionate. We now come to a closing. It'll be a battle of the ladies.
Am I audible enough? Gary, 3 minutes is very short. I will
know
begin
that.
my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, panel, the debate is not about telling us the advantages or disadvantages of using electric vehicles. What the opposition was busy doing here was outlining what disadvantages we will face as Zimbabwe when we adapt to electric vehicles. Panel, the opposition comes here and tells us that EVs are very expensive. As the proposition, we are saying that we are going to be able to acquire these EVs through upfront costs. Look, petrol is very, very expensive. Whenever we are trying to import petrol, we are using about 1.5 billion according to statistics last year. This means that if we cut costs from petroleum, this will actually engage for us to be able to start investing in these EVs. They come in, they also tell us that electricity is very unreliable in Zimbabwe through blackouts and whatsoever. But we're telling you that we're going to be using solar power charging. They tell us that how are you going to be using solar panels in
most of the household, how are you going to be charging 50 cars whatsoever? But we're telling you that we are going to be using smaller grids. We're not going to be entirely relating or entirely engaged with our main grid because we already know that it is not very sustainable for us. But we are saying that we're going to be using these solar panels in order to help us to charge these vehicles. Panel, please let us understand that we're not saying that we want to change or we're trying to stop the use of these vehicles now. No, it is a gradual process. As the proposition, we're saying that this is a 10-year plan. We want to start small and go. Panel, what the opposition is coming in asking us, they're asking us to wait. They're asking us to be ready. Well, I say to you, a country that waits to be ready will never be ready in any time. But a country, for it to be ready, it needs to invest. We need to invest in projects like this because if we do not, it's just the same thing as saying that we want to build a hospital. Then we procrastinate because we're saying that the land is not good enough for us to build. But what do? We work on the land. We start building, we'll start with plans, and not just waiting until maybe the land is now fine and we feel like, yes, now we are able to actually build these hospitals and stuff. Panel, the opposition comes here and tells us that we can transport about 3 tons through bikes. What I would like to go back, I remember someone said that listening is actually a skill, and we think we need to acquire that as people in this room. Our first speaker had given us a full definition that electric vehicles are vehicles that are powered fully or partially by electricity, right? She said that these vehicles would include buses, would include bikes, will include other cars such as those trucks. We're not saying that we're going to be using bikes for tackling those Raja towns or whatever. Panel, I will not waste time in rebutting them, but I will try to just paint a picture that every generation faces a decision between preserving what is familiar and preparing for the future. So we ask this House the opposition is asking this House to continue to rely on technologies that are not enough, to rely on technologies that continue to bring pollution into this country. They're asking us to wait and continue to be dependent on fuels. But we're asking this House to begin to be responsible and transition into a phase and transition to a place whereby we're able to say that this project, we are able to promote climate and also stop these pollution and everything that is going on. Panel, the opposition asks us to be ready before investing, but we're asking you that, but we're telling you that while we invest, we're able to reach our goals. And with that, I've never been happy to propose.
Thank you. And you did great for just over 3 minutes, by the way. So folks, we have one more voice, and then the debate begins to be adjudicated. Could I call forth our last speaker?
Am I audible? I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Please notice how side opposition wins on principle. Why do we win on principle? Of whether this is viable for everyone or for the greatest number. Please understand that, as the third speaker says exactly from side proposition, this is not a matter of procrastination. It's a matter of whether this is practicable or not. Can we apply this in Zimbabwe? Are we able to sustain it or not? Thank you. Now, a couple of clashes that we faced from government. Number one, I will tell you the issue of whether this is viable or not. They forgot to mention that when we talk of viability, we're not only talking about whether this is whether this is only like reliable or not, but we also talk of whether it's accessible to everyone. This is when we speak of how it reaches and also gives access to each and every one. And as the president's mantra, we think that we should not leave no one and no place behind. And we think that the whole initiative that they want to stand for, they don't cater for those who are in the peri-urban areas, they don't cater for those who don't afford to buy a Tesla, they don't cater for those who are in the rural areas. So we dismantle whatever that they try to say. Now, moving on, what then is said in the first speech, I'll really clash, sorry. Now, the first speaker, he wasted a lot of time speaking about how we have lithium and how we should utilize it and the likes. Now, before I even get into the advantages of lithium, let me tell you the problems that comes with mining in of itself, and also another problem that comes with the person who is perpetuating mining in of itself. This is not someone who has the best interest of Zimbabwe, but rather this is someone with a capitalistic mind who probably doesn't care of whether the land is degraded after it or not. I'm talking about China. So please understand that whatever they then come up to say is totally dismantled in this debate, because the whole mining of lithium in of itself, it actually dismantles and does not stand for climate change, which we're trying to curb. So already, whatever their speech is all about, it falls flat. Now, what then does they tell you? They tell you, oh my gosh, no, we've got solar power, it's so sunshine here in Africa. Panel, solar power exists, coal exists here in Africa, here in Zimbabwe, but we have load shedding that is so problematic already that in of itself should tell you how much we don't even have the capacity to uphold this EVS they so much want to stand for. Now, please understand that before you even get into their world, they don't even paint a picture of what actually using EVS looks like in Zimbabwe, what it looks like for a common man, rather what it looks like actually for someone who's living in the rural areas, which we think is something that is only from side opposition, and I'm going to tell you why. Now, panel, please understand that when we speak of viability, we're talking about affordable. Number two, accessibility. Most importantly, accessible for each and everyone. Now, if a solution leaves 60% behind of the country, it's a solution that we don't think we need to buy into. And with that remaining, we tell you that we don't buy with whatever side government is saying. Now, please understand that when, second speaker. Now, second speaker tries to include rural and peri-urban areas, and they say that, oh no, we're going to include them. I don't even find how they're going to include them, because understand that already, in order for these electric motors to be able to function, they need to be charged. They need to be charged by electricity that we don't even have here in Zimbabwe. Please understand that the demand in Zimbabwe in terms of electricity is higher than the supply. Already there's a gap which the government is failing to meet. Do you think that we'll be able to meet even when there is actually more demand in electricity? I think that's something that they ought to consider. And as panel and everyone who is listening, it's something that you need to ponder on. Now, what else do we tell you that? We tell you that, they ask a POI, this person in black, the fine man, he speaks of, oh no, should Zimbabwe continue to buy expensive oil from Iran, mind you, because of the conflicts that are already going on? We tell you that, actually, I thought this was common knowledge, but anyway, it's actually very cheaper to import fuel from Iran with all the existing conflicts than it is to buy a Tesla. In current status quo, please understand that here in Zimbabwe, only one person owns a Tesla. Now understand, please take it into consideration. How then does this apply if you're to say, oh no, we want to promote EVS and we want people to be able to transport from point A to B using electric motors, when an average normal person can't even afford it? Now, what do we say then? What is my job as weak? My job was to prove to you three things. Now, show you where the point of clash in this debate is, and we tell you that it has been on the issue of how it's viable, how it's not affordable for each and every common man. Number two, we tell you what does it look like when we propose what opposition is saying. We're saying, oh no, why not invest in fixing the current infrastructure that already exists? Leo tells you about the rail systems, how we can pour into that and make sure that our citizens actually afford their transport and get to point A and B, which is something we think that the government ought to buy into. We also tell you that, oh no, we deserve to win this debate because number two, we include each and everyone. We don't leave anyone behind. That being the people who are in the rural areas who can't afford to buy expensive cars, let alone a bicycle. Panel, we think we ought to regard each and everyone. We're not against development, but I think it is in everyone's best interest if we develop for everyone. Without, we've never been more proud to win.
Wow. I feel like I've been to a rock concert but without music. Fantastic. Now folks, I know that we compressed a lot of energy and thought into minimal time. Wasn't fun, was it? But that's life. Guess what? It's going to get worse for the next group. But first, Solomon, come forward, sir. We've heard a lot of words. Bukosi, Mr. Mbele, you heard a lot of words. It's wonderful to have you as an adjudicator as well. Wonderful, thank you. Makanaka. Right, well, we have a very wonderful and handsome couple here. Let me just ask you, what were your thoughts on the presentations given, and then your vote?
I would like to say both
teams were very informative. I think the debate was very knowledgeable, very well researched. But I would have to take the side of the opposition. They managed to bring up issues that come up when you're transitioning to clean energy. For example, how it doesn't accommodate the ordinary Zimbabwean. Imagine trying to open up a solar farm. That takes a lot of capital, and we can already tell from our economy that there are already economical issues. So I really like that the opposition managed to tackle the problems that we face. Thank you.
Succinct. Do you feel the same way?
I don't. I have to say, for such an interesting topic, I was very disappointed. Talking about viability, and no one even mentioned the price of what an EV looks like. We have EVs exhibiting outside, and no one did the research. It seems like no one did the research at all to at least give us the average price of an EV. How much is it? People were saying it's more expensive, and the other side came in saying it isn't that expensive, but we don't know because we don't have the numbers. And I feel this topic itself, and thank you for coming. This decision was going to be very difficult on my own. This topic was heavily favoring the affirmative side, but they failed to engage the very important issues raised by the opposition, which was the revival of the NRZ. What about number two? What about the guy who can't afford the non-motorized tricycle and the EV? What do they do? You didn't have a solution for that one as well. And the roads issue is an issue for both parties, whether motorized vehicles or electric vehicles. With that said, I also favor the non-affirmative side. I think they took this one away given the circumstances.
Thank you. All right, now to refresh your memory, could I have the very handsome couples and teams please face us? We're going to take a quick audience vote before we close out. To my right, do you agree they win today's debate? Could I have a show of hands? That's to my right. And on my left-hand side, do they win today's debate? All right, I think you've seen a show of hands. Both teams very impassioned. Well done. Thank you, adjudicators, and thank you, universities. You represented your brands well. Thank you. Give them a hand, folks. All right. Climate changes, cultural climate changes, and the moments of climate change in a room even like now. And so for our last debate, which wasn't going to take place, but now is, we're going to change the rules yet again. Please could I have and invite Lupani State University versus Chinhoyi University of Technology. Let's give them a hand, folks. Now team, Ben upstanding and coming in, could I please have both universities face forward at the front of this podium? Just turn around and face forward. Let the people see you. Non-verbal communication sometimes is greater than verbal. Face the audience and smile. You represent both brands. Now the rules have changed. I'm going to read out the debate motion and to add a frightening dimension to what you're about to face. I'm going to take away all your notebooks, all your cell phones, all your cheat sheets, and all you're left with is yourself facing that cold, cruel audience. While you trepidate on that thought, yes, you weren't prepared for this. Yes, you didn't think this would happen. Yes, you think life is unfair. Well, welcome to life outside of the university, people. Give yourself a hand, because this is real life. And you're up to the task. You will not need your notes. You will not need a piece of paper. All you will need is a mic. And you will not be sitting down. You will see. Take this back to your universities. Blame Ben, not me. The debate motion. This House, it's a critical point. This House believes that for Zimbabwe to achieve its 2030 climate goals, did you hear that? For us to achieve our 2030 climate goals, what? We must prioritize environmental restoration over the expansion of the mining industry. Audience, have you got clarity? It is environmental restoration over mining expansion. That's it. That's all that is being debated. Now, panelists, debaters, as you represent your brands, hear the rules. I want you, in this magic moment, you're getting 1 minute each, to think about the most important point you were going to speak about. We don't want to hear 10. We don't want to hear 20. We don't want to hear you take a 50-minute speech and make it 5 minutes. We want you to give 1 minute. If you were before the president of this nation, or you were before the United Nations, and you had 1 minute, what would you say? You can debate amongst yourselves right now over this next minute which topic you're going to take, because you each have a minute to, with passion, purpose, content, and skill, sell something. While you're debating, I will invite the adjudicators.
Could I please invite Simon from Enactus, Tanashi Shireni from Wild Ed. Thank you. If you could be upstanding. Good to see you. Teams, use this time to debate. You've got 1 minute of strategy to decide who's going to say what. Use this minute. Think about the rules. Life has changed. The climate has changed. While they're thinking. It's good to meet you. Simon? Simon, good to meet you. And Tanashi. Guys, tell us a little about yourselves.
Okay, Tinashi Sharon from Wild Ed Sim. At Wild Ed Sim, we do conservation education in urban and peri-urban areas.
How successful have you been in your opinion?
So far, we have been in 5 months in operation, and we have managed to reach out to more than 250 students.
So you're feeling confident this is going to grow?
Yes, we are very positive.
Well, for you to stand in front of people and speak like that means you do have confidence. Well done. Give him a hand, folks. He didn't know I was going to ask him these questions. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Don't go away.
Okay, myself is Simon Mskawan. I'm the team president for Enactus University of Zimbabwe. What we do, we are Enactus is an abbreviation for Entrepreneur Action, us meaning the community. So we do various projects around campus and also in the community. So we have our exhibition booth, which is also outside. We are showcasing our climate innovation products, which are doing X-rays, which are coming from what I seen from Lecture.
All right, let's get the most important part of that final part. Product, egg trays. Did you ever think you'd meet an egg tray manufacturer at the University of Zimbabwe Diamond Hall today? That's amazing. Egg trays. How successful have you been so far?
So far we have for the X-rays they were successful. Last year they were represented in Thailand for Enactus World Cup and they won the early stage competition.
Fantastic, isn't that amazing? We're going all the way to Thailand and competing. Look, if you can beat the Asians, you're onto something. Well, may we wish you every degree of success. Okay, so take your creative mindset, go and grab a seat, and you too, sir, because we're going to have a different type of debate. And in fact, it's going to be so different. You're young men. Could I challenge you? I'd like both of you to stand on the steps right here so you can face these people. They're not going to be speaking for 3 hours. They're each going to get 3 minutes team. Hopefully they've used this time now to prepare a strategy. Folks, you see what's happening? You've got a minute with each of you, times 3 is 3 minutes, to ensure you get the most important points out. Are you ready for the rules of engagement? 1 minute each. I will be timing. If you wish to add to another party's points, you'll lose those seconds and give it to someone else. I yield, and then you can take up and say some other points. In other words, time is against you. Make time work for you. Don't give us too many facts. Give us a winning argument. Do you see the difference? If not, the world will treat you cruelly when you are before a board or some other environment that doesn't have time. Are you ready? After this, we will take a question from the audience that could be thrown at you, not just from the opposition. We'll take some opposition and proponent arguments, and then we'll go to adjudication and vote. Are we ready? Both teams, can you be upstanding and facing the audience? You won't need notes, I assure you. Ben, the rules have changed in life. Climate changes. It was sunny, now it's cloudy. Non-verbal communication, this is a lesson for you. Walk with confidence. Walk as if you knew you were going to win this thing. Don't sigh. Don't shrug your shoulders. The audience will see it. And in Paris, let me tell you, they're presenting with conviction. And we in Africa have that same conviction. So be ready. You're winners. And you're going to give a winning argument to us on both sides. Are you ready? 1 minute. Then it goes to 1 minute. 1 minute. Then 1 minute. And you better get the best points. Don't repeat each other's points. It'll be probably best for you to multiply. Are you ready? Sir, you're up front. Go.
All right. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rumiza Zishiri, and I'm the first speaker today for the affirmative side of this motion. So the motion that we have today in this House today is the House believes that for Zimbabwe to achieve its climate goals, it must prioritize environmental restoration instead of the mining industry. Okay, instead of expanding the mining industry. Okay, so with that said, we see that in Zimbabwe, right, we can't really say that the mining is the, in fact, yeah, actually mining is the most important thing. Yes, we understand that because it gives us some form of money, right? But we can't really say that it is the only thing that gives us money in this country, okay? Destroying our lands and destroying our climate is actually a very big issue. So we're not saying that we should stop all mining, no. That's not what we're saying, because mining is already existent. Actually, what we're saying is, before we dig a new pit and before we dig a new hole, we must first prioritize the restoration of the already degraded land that has been degraded by the mines themselves. So what we are saying here as our team, the mining has already destroyed our lands as we speak, right? And what we want to prioritize is to restore that land back to its original state before we actually think about actually expanding the mining sector.
Thank you. That's 1 minute.
Oh.
Okay. Am I audible? I guess I'm going first. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot create another problem to solve another problem. And the base facts that we want to focus on, resource utilization, solvent resource utilization. Ladies and gentlemen, as she said, mining is the most important factor that we have bringing us money in our economy and our GDP. So, if we can't use our God-given resources, what are we really doing, ladies and gentlemen? If you see how our economy looks right now and how we are as a nation, we are already surviving with mining involved. What more if you decide to remove it or reduce it? That is like shooting yourself in the foot. So let's call to all our senses and let's really think about it. We've got the most beautiful minerals of the highest potency that we have. Why not use that? Zimbabwe is mostly referred to as the gold mine of all the other countries in Africa because of our minerals. Why do you think our minerals are so great? It's because we have the best and we must utilize it. I will give an example such as the Black Panther movie. I'm sure we've all seen the Black Panther movie. What made the Black Panther nation that we have Wakanda great like it was? It was its resource of vibranium. So in Zimbabwe, we've got our lithium, we've got our gold resources. Why not use that? And why not use it to better our country even more so we can reach our goals even faster?
Thank you. I said 1 minute, I gave you more. Thank you. Great points. Next up.
Am I audible? Ladies and gentlemen, I think the opposition didn't understand the motion. The motion said, what must we prioritize? Mining expansion or environmental restoration? We are not saying mining should stop. The opposition said we are saying that mining should be reduced or that it should stop. No, we are not saying mining should stop. We are saying mining should stop expansion. The Zimbabwe's NDC 3.0 states that most of 80% actually of climate potentially restoration that we have in Zimbabwe, 80% of it lies in forestry. It lies in the land use change and forestry. So if we prioritize mining, it means that we are destroying the forest. If we prioritize mining, already Zimbabwe requires $19 billion in order to restore already destroyed forest. Does mining provide that 19 billion? I don't think it does. So ladies and gentlemen, I leave you with the question. What should we prioritize? Expanding mining or restoring land? If we prioritize expanding mining, it means that we are creating a gap that we already have. We are creating more cost. $19 billion, I don't think that's a little money to me. Already, $19 billion is a huge gap.
Thank you.
Can mining actually cover that gap? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well done.
Good afternoon. Am I audible? Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think the proposition ignores one important question. What do we wish to achieve with this motion? What we wish to achieve is a situation where both the current generations and future generations are catered for. And now, as highlighted by the first speaker, our main contributor to exports is mining, and that's how we get most of our export revenue. Now, once we say we are no longer prioritizing that, and we are prioritizing reforestation and environmental restoration efforts. Now, the problem that we have, as he highlighted the issue, a very sensitive issue, that we have an issue of funding. Now, most of our funds, they come from the mining. Mining contributes substantially to our GDP as a country. Now, if we remove it, or if we divert efforts, we abruptly divert efforts, now we have a serious problem. And we also have a problem of where we already have market structures in place that are here for the mining sector. And once we divert these funds, once we divert these efforts, what we now have is a situation where there is some imbalance and our systems are upset, ladies and gentlemen. And now, to also add, it takes a lot of time for environmental restoration efforts to truly profit us as a people. So our question to them is, do we sacrifice the current generations by chasing a dream that we are providing a solution for the future generations? Is that what we're saying? Because if it takes 10 to 15 years for us to truly achieve profitability, how are we supposed to survive with the current status quo? Thank you.
Thank you. We now come to the final.
Afternoon. I'll begin my rebuttal with a bit of sarcasm. What's the point of enjoying infidelity whilst you foresee in the near future? So we can't really say we should expand on mining when it causes detrimental effects on our environment. We talk of the Wangi area where mining is causing a lot of deforestation, where we need the trees for sequestrating our carbon. So ladies and gentlemen, we can't really say mining should expand, but we are okay with the current mines that we have, and we employ the government that they should promote sustainable development in those mines. Thank you.
A very good afternoon it is to all of you. Now, I want everyone in this room to remember one key point that our delegation brought to the table. We are saying that we are focusing on complementarity, not
Thank you. All right, folks. It's that time of climate change where we're going to see who was hot, who was cold, or did we have a bit of both? Adjudicators. Let's talk. First, looking at them, what would you want to say?
I would like to say all the teams are presented well, but what we can say is that what we can prioritize from my side is that we can prioritize environmental restoration of mining expansion. Why? This is because we can also do other things like recycling, like circular economy. What we can do, like for lithium batteries, we can always recycle the batteries and also aid to environmental restoration. And also, we can also save for the future. Like if we reduce mining this moment and encourage circular economy, we can have more minerals to mine in the future. That's my point from my side.
All right, thank you. Hold these thoughts, because I've got a bonus option for you before we vote.
Okay, from my side, I will take non-affirmative side because they raise points that are practical in my thinking because we can't really stop mining because it's really the backbone of the economy.
Maybe rephrase that. They didn't say non-stop.
Or they expand, should not expand.
Except operational mines.
Okay.
Don't destroy them. All right. Adjudicators, could you stand by your respective teams that you've judged? And now we're going to take the vote. And remember, folks, the popular vote may go differently. Are you standing with your team? Now, teams, before the popular vote, you get a chance to give one more impassioned plea to the voters as to why they should vote for your university and your proposition. Would you like to speak? Closing remark? You get one closing remark. It's now. Just one person. 3. Take the motion.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the motion said, what should we prioritize? Mining expansion or environmental restoration? As the team going for the motion, we are saying mining should not expand. We are not saying the current mining should stop. We are saying mining should not expand. We are saying we should prioritize environmental restoration. And my question is, can mining cover the gap of $19 billion that we need for environmental restoration? Thank you.
Thank you. You said that twice and you made your point clear. Closing remarks to win the undecided voters potentially.
Ladies and gentlemen, instead of going broke with the proposed plan, what we can do is use the modern mining methods, which are green mining this day, which has become safer for the environment itself, which means we keep both the benefits of mining and don't have to empty our pockets like they are saying, which is more realistic if you think about it. That is all I'll say.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, you get to vote. Could I have, for those on my side, this side, raise your hands if you vote for this team, this brand. It looks like you have steered the day. And if we were to come to the very beautiful, this side, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, adjudicators, help me. Who's won? Who's won, or is it a tie?
It's a tie.
Oh. I hope you saw something today, that life changes, climate changes, situations change. Really proud of you. Well done, folks. Big high five. You all did it. You're all winners, and you close us out today. Thank you, adjudicators. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming all the way. It hasn't been an easy journey, but we've got here. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to an end of our climatic first initiation into this amazing topic of climate. Thank you, Lupani. Thank you, Chinoi. And thank you, Ben, for making this day possible. We've packed so much in. Zimbabwe Students Climate Innovation Summit 26, we now come to a close. May you get home safely, and may you take great thought and great debate as we go on. Sometimes it's not wrongs or rights, it's getting into the debate. Ben, thank you for being a champion. Goodbye, everybody. Until we see you next time, may the sun shine on you. Good night.